The morning sun filtered through the paper walls of the Takeda estate, casting a pale, ghostly glow across the tatami mats. The scent of incense lingered in the air, faintly masking the metallic tang of blood. The scene was quiet, reverent, but far from peaceful. Lord Takeda Saburo, a respected samurai of the Edo period, was found dead in his private study. He sat upright in the formal sized position, legs folded beneath him, hands resting on his knees. His katana lay across his lap, its blade red with blood, as if it just tasted the truth of a man's final honor. A sheet of rice paper, inked with a poem in elegant brush strokes, sat beside him. But something about the tableau was wrong. Too clean, too precise, too staged. The house steward, Ichiro, was the first to discover the body. His cries of alarm brought the household to its knees in shock. Servants wailed in the courtyard. The family's physician arrived, but only confirmed what everyone already knew. Takeda Saburo was gone. By noon, word had reached the local magistrate, and an official inquest was launched. To all appearances, it was seppuku, ritual suicide, the noble end of a warrior who had failed or was disgraced. But Takeda Saburo had not been shamed. There were no public scandals, no whispered rumors in the town. He was not only revered by his peers, but respected even by his rivals. The notion that he would take his own life in silence made no sense. What puzzled the magistrate further was the poem. Haunting in tone, it read, "Steel drinks the silent moonlight. Shadows fall on a sleepless heart. When honor is taken, the blade speaks last." It was cryptic, even for a death poem or jisei, and it didn't bear the usual resignation or spiritual calm that typically marked a samurai's final words. Instead, it hinted at injustice, betrayal, and unfinished business. The investigation was led by Magistrate Fukuda, a seasoned official with a sharp mind and a healthy skepticism for tradition. "Seppuku leaves a pattern," he told his assistant as they examined the body. "Blood should be pooled in front of the knees, not beneath the back. And the cut, it's too shallow. Too perfect. No hesitation. It's as if someone knew exactly how to mimic the ritual, but not feel it." He was right. An autopsy, unusual for the time but allowed in such mysterious circumstances, showed that the real cause of death wasn't from a gut wound, but from a deep stab wound between the ribs, one that pierced the heart. The katana's placement had been theatrical, not surgical. The scroll, Saburo's final poem, was another oddity. Forensic scribes noted subtle inconsistencies in the ink flow. It was written with a controlled, deliberate hand, but under close analysis, several kanji were drawn using alternate stroke orders, as though written by someone mimicking Saburo's style. But who would kill a loyal retainer, and why stage it as an honorable suicide? The motive had to be deep, personal, or political. Perhaps both. Saburo's adopted daughter, Hana, was devastated. Barely 20. She had grown up idolizing the man who took her in after her father died in a border skirmish. "He would never do this," she whispered, holding the poem in trembling hands. "He taught me the blade is a last resort. But this is not his end." Hana's instincts weren't just emotional, they were trained. Saburo had raised her not only as a daughter, but as a shadow student in swordsmanship, calligraphy, and the deeper meanings of Bushido. She had learned to read silences and subtleties, and something about the room felt wrong to her. The calligraphy was missing a mark he always used, a small upward stroke at the end of his name. It wasn't there. That's when she knew. Someone had forged his final message. Quietly, she retrieved a sealed letter from the back of Saburo's desk drawer. It was addressed to her, unopened, unmarked by any magistrate. Inside was a single phrase: "If the blade is quiet, follow the ink." What did it mean? Was this his real final message? Did he know someone would try to silence him? And who would know to forge his death in a way only a samurai might understand? Hana now faced a decision. Stay quiet and let the story pass as honor-bound suicide, or question it, risking everything Saburo built. She chose the latter. This was no suicide. This was a riddle, and someone didn't want it solved. Long before it became a name whispered in suspicion, Takeda Saburo was a man carved from the very essence of the samurai code. Born into a lesser branch of the Takeda clan during the waning days of the Tokugawa shogunate, Saburo came of age at a time when Japan itself stood on the precipice of transformation, while others bent with the political winds. He remained unmoved, resolute, like a blade that refused to dull. He wasn't born into prestige, but he earned it. Orphaned young by a border skirmish with a rival clan, Saburo entered the service of Lord Hoshikawa, a daimyo known for his brutal enforcement of Bushido. Saburo excelled in everything he was taught: swordsmanship, calligraphy, poetry, and the delicate art of diplomacy. Unlike the boastful sons of noblemen, he spoke little, observed much, and acted only when the time was right. Silence became his greatest ally. Those close to him said he wore his honor like armor. His discipline bordered on obsession. He rose before dawn to practice sword forms in the garden, often training alone under the peach trees, their blossoms falling like silent snow. His only indulgence was the occasional poem, scribbled in the margins of dispatch scrolls or inked into the handles of his weapons. Elegant verses about wind, duty, and impermanence. But the era of Saburo's rise was also one of decay. While the samurai caste clung to their rituals, the outer world crept in. Black ships had arrived in the harbors, and with them, foreign influence. Opium, firearms, and Western ideas began to seep into the cracks of Japan's rigid structure. Some lords embraced the change. Others, like Saburo, regarded it with quiet contempt. It was during this uncertain time that Saburo adopted Hana, the daughter of a fellow samurai who had died defending the clan's honor in a border dispute. Saburo never married, never sired heirs of his own, but with Hana, he found a reflection of his younger self. Curious, fierce, and unyielding, against the expectations of his peers, he trained her in the way of the sword, the art of strategy, and the code of Bushido. He told her stories of honor, not as myths, but as living obligations. Steel must be strong, he once told her, but never cruel, and a blade never strikes without purpose. Yet even as he trained Hana, Saburo's heart grew heavier with the burden of what he saw within his own clan. Corruption had begun to fester. Trade records were falsified. Goods moved in and out of the port under nightfall. Shipments not accounted for in official ledgers. Courtiers once devoted to loyalty whispered in back rooms, their robes heavy with bribes. Saburo, bound by honor, reported these suspicions to Lord Hoshikawa. But nothing changed. In private, Saburo wrote, "The wound is deep not in the flesh, but in the silence of those who look away." He became isolated, not shunned, but subtly pushed aside. Invitations to clan councils dwindled. His counsel was no longer sought in matters of policy. Some whispered that he had become too rigid, too devoted to a fading ideal. Yet outwardly, he continued his duties with the same diligence, the same poise as always. It was during this time that Saburo began crafting what would later be known as the Puzzle Scroll, a document written in layered metaphors, historical references, and ciphers. To outsiders, it resembled nothing more than a poetic journal. But to someone like Hana, someone trained in his way of thinking, it was a hidden record of decay within the clan, a testimony encrypted for a time when truth might finally matter. Saburo never said why he wrote it. He never told Hana it existed. But she found traces, fragments of metaphors in his poetry, symbols carved into the walls of his study, slight alterations in the way he painted certain kanji. It was as if he were speaking to someone far in the future, planting clues in plain sight. Toward the end of his life, Saburo grew more withdrawn. He stopped attending clan banquets. He refused invitations from senior officials. Even his poetry changed, no longer focused on the harmony of nature, but the discord of men. There were no outbursts, no accusations, just quiet disapproval, layered in politeness and icy formality. Then came the night of his death. For someone who believed in truth, it seemed impossible that he would choose silence. For someone who taught Hana never to surrender to injustice, it was inconceivable that he would end his life without a word. But what if he didn't? What if the truth had been spoken, not aloud but written, and hidden in such a way that only the one he trusted most could find it? Hana now saw her father's life not as a series of solitary choices, but as a long preparation for this final, silent stand. A man of steel and silence, who left behind a riddle sharp enough to cut through centuries. It was during the second night after Saburo's death, As the state dimmed into the quiet hours, that Hana found it, the hidden scroll. The servants had retired, the magistrate had taken his notes, and the body had been cremated per tradition. But Hana lingered in her father's study, feeling the silence press down like a weight. Something in the room still spoke, not aloud, but through presence. She moved the tatami mat slowly, careful not to disturb the setting. Her fingers paused a loose floorboard, one that creaked oddly under her weight when she stepped on it earlier. Pulling it up, she found a lacquered cedar box, sealed with a silk cord in the pattern of the musubi knot, a looped bow her father used when tying scrolls of special meaning. Her breath caught. Inside was the scroll. At first glance, it appeared to be a poem, a simple, beautiful one. But Hana knew her father's style too well. He was a master of hiding depth behind grace, concealing daggers beneath blossoms. The scroll's surface was brushed with rich black ink and faint red characters interspersed along the margins. The ink had slightly bled into the rice paper, old enough to be meaningful, recent enough to still be legible. She unrolled it slowly, laying across the desk. The lines read, "When the crane flies backward and shadows move east before dawn, look beneath the jade circle. There the storm sleeps." It was abstract, enigmatic, but certain phrases, jade circle, crane flies backward, weren't typical poetic devices. They echoed things he had told her in training, like riddles during sparring, metaphors tied to specific teachings. She recalled one moment vividly. After a training session, he had said, "If you ever must uncover what I cannot speak aloud, follow the crane. It never forgets its sky." Now she saw it for what it truly was, a cipher, a coded message. Her heart pounded as she examined the side markings. The red characters weren't poetic at all. They were numbers, arranged in patterns that mimicked ancient calendar systems. Some correlated with lunar phases, others with historical battle dates. One mark appeared repeatedly, the symbol for silence paired with a crescent moon. It was a symbol he had used before, only in his earliest calligraphy, when he wrote about betrayal. She worked through the night, comparing symbols, running her finger along the familiar brush strokes. It wasn't merely a poem, it was a layered code. There were 3 distinct systems embedded in the text, one for dates, one for names, and one, the most complex, for locations. By dawn, she had deciphered the first segment. It spoke of a ledger, one kept in secret by a high-ranking member of the clan, hidden in a place where stone drinks sun but sees no light. Hana guessed it meant a crypt or a chamber beneath the temple near the coast, a place her father often visited under the pretense of quiet reflection. But what ledger? And why would he risk documenting something so dangerous? The implications were staggering. If Saburo had discovered evidence of wrongdoing, corruption, espionage, or forbidden trade, he would not expose it carelessly. Writing it plainly could lead to his execution, or worse, dishonor to the entire Takeda name. So he encoded it, trusting that Hana and only Hana would understand. But the scroll wasn't only a message, it was a map, a trail of symbolic markers, leading to knowledge long buried. The references weren't fictional. They pointed to real places and real people, some still alive. Names emerged in layered verses, suggesting their guilt without outright accusation. One was Lord Hashikawa's chief treasurer, another, an old warrior who had left the service mysteriously. Each name written not directly, but through metaphors Hana had to unravel. And then she saw it, a line tucked into the margin, written in a barely visible shade of ink, blended into the paper's fibers. The one who wears honor like silk hides poison in his sleeve. Her breath caught. That was a line her father had said once. Not as poetry, but during a heated conversation after a clan council meeting. She had asked what troubled him. He had only said, "Beware those who bow the lowest." That line, hidden in the scroll, confirmed it. The betrayal came from inside. Someone in the Takeda hierarchy, someone close trusted, had orchestrated his death. This scroll was his legacy, his final stand. Not a weapon, but a whisper across time, meant to ignite action after his voice had been silenced. And now, Hana realized, whoever killed Saburo didn't know about the scroll. Yet, she rolled it back up, heart racing, fingers trembling. She needed help, someone she could trust. But trust, in this world of veiled faces and ceremonial smiles, was its own kind of riddle. Saburo's final code wasn't just about justice. It was a call to war, one waged in silence with ink, memory, and steel. The Takeda estate, once a symbol of unity and grace, now pulsed with suspicion. In the wake of Saburo's mysterious death and Hana's discovery of the scroll, a storm was brewing, silent, calculated, and deadly. Every bow seemed a little deeper, every smile more carefully measured, and Hana began to see what she had never truly noticed before. Her father had been surrounded not by loyal retainers, but by a court of masks. To the world, the Takeda clan was the embodiment of order, but beneath the polished surface, it was a nest of grudges, ambitions, and old feuds. Saburo had known it. He had written about it in the coded verses of the scroll. And now, Hana had to peel back the layers to see the rot he had tried so hard to hide. She began with the most obvious suspect, Takeda Ryoji, Saburo's cousin. Once a fierce swordsman and contender for the clan's command, Ryoji had been disgraced a decade earlier after leading a failed skirmish against a rival family. His punishment had been political exile, stripped of title but kept close under the guise of reconciliation. Now, Ryoji served in the records office, quiet, unnoticed, yet always watching. Hana paid him a visit. He greeted her with the stiff courtesy of a man still licking wounds he could never speak of. His room was lined with scrolls and ledgers, the air heavy with ink and incense. "To what do I owe the honor, Lady Hana?" he asked, voice like a blade dulled by time. "I've come about my father," she said. "I believe he left things undone." Ryoji's eyes narrowed. The dead often leave behind riddles. It is not always our place to solve them. But sometimes, Hana said quietly, they demand it. She noticed a twitch in his jaw. Something unspoken stirred behind his calm expression. "You never forgave him," she said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Forgiveness is for priests." "I think he knew," she continued, "that the clan was falling apart, that the code was being twisted." Ryoji turned away, fiddling with a scroll ribbon. He saw too much. But the world doesn't reward men like Saburo anymore. It devours them. His words chilled her. Not a confession, but a confirmation. Saburo had been a threat to those who wanted the code gone, replaced by ambition. And Ryoji, despite his own bitterness, may have known more than he was saying. Next, she sought Matsuda Kenji, the clan sword instructor, a man known for his icy demeanor and obsessive perfectionism. He had trained under Saburo, and their relationship was often strained, respect marred by unspoken rivalry. Matsuda, many said, had hoped to lead the dojo himself, but Saburo had denied him the title. Their meeting took place in the training hall. Just after dusk, the bamboo floor creaked beneath their steps. Hana bowed low. Matsuda nodded but did not return the gesture fully. "You seek answers," he said bluntly. "You should let your father rest." "Did you kill him?" she asked. His fingers twitched, not toward his blade, but as if resisting the urge to. "I respected your father," he said, but he was too proud, too rigid. He made enemies. "Did you?" she asked again. Matsuda stepped closer, his voice lowered to a whisper. "No, but I warned him. When a man carries a blade of truth into a den of liars, he should expect to be cut." That was the second veiled truth. And then came the most dangerous visit, Lord Hoshikawa's inner chamber. As the reigning daimyo, Hoshikawa was powerful, untouchable. He had relied on Saburo for years, as a sword, a diplomat, and a conscience. But recently, the two had grown distant. Rumors swirled about secret dealings, shipments leaving the ports late at night, men in foreign dress seen entering his estate. The scroll hinted at these as whispers in silk robes, and Hana believed it now referred to Hoshikawa himself. She was granted an audience, not in private, but under the watchful eyes of guards and advisors. "I offer my condolences," he said with false warmth. "Saburo's loss is unfortunate." "Unfortunate, yes," Hana replied, "and unnatural." A pause. Hoshikawa tilted his head. "You question the verdict?" "I question silence." His eyes darkened. "Be careful, child. The path of suspicion is a sharp one." She bowed and withdrew, but his tone confirmed what she feared, that Hashikawa was not merely aware, but involved. Whether directly in Saburo's death or in the secrets the scroll hinted at, he was part of the decay. By the end of that week, Hana had identified 3 key threats: Ryoji, burned by envy; Matsuda, cold and quietly resentful; and Hashikawa, the powerful architect of a possible conspiracy. But which of them had wielded the fatal blade, which had orchestrated the false seppuku? Perhaps all of them had played their parts, each a piece in a betrayal Saburo had seen coming. As she returned to her chambers, Hana clutched the scroll tightly. Her father hadn't just been murdered, he had been silenced. And now, they were watching her too. The blade was supposed to be the ultimate truth. In samurai culture, the katana was not simply a weapon. It was a mirror, reflecting a man's honor, his intentions, and, if he was to commit seppuku, his final truth. The ritual of self-disembowelment was precise, sacred. It required strength not just of body, but of will. Saburo, if he had truly chosen that end, would have followed the ancient method to the letter. Every cut, every motion would speak to his discipline. But the blade told another story. Hana couldn't shake the feeling that something about the death scene had been constructed, like a stage play carefully arranged to convince its audience. She returned to her father's private dojo under the pretense of mourning, bringing with her the family swordsmith, Master Shigetsu, an old friend of Saburo's who had once forged blades for clan's elite. He was a stooped man with gray eyebrows like drifting clouds and hands that trembled from age, but not when he handled steel. He reverently unsheathed Saburo's katana and studied it under the light of a hanging lantern. Minutes passed. Then he sighed. "This blade has not tasted self-infliction," he said. Hana's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Shigetsu pointed to the blood residue on the edge. "The angle is wrong. Too clean. The stroke is straight, not the typical left-to-right arc of seppuku. And look here," he tilted the blade. "There's an impact ridge, faint but clear. This was driven into something solid. Bone, rib, with force." Hana's heart pounded. Then, this was not used by Saburo. It was used on him. It was a confirmation she feared and needed. The katana had been planted after death. The wound that had supposedly been self-inflicted was surgically staged. The true fatal blow had come from behind or the side, driving directly into his heart. Swift, clean, done by someone skilled enough to kill without hesitation. She asked, "Would the blade show if someone else held it?" Shigetsu nodded. "Not unless they were careless. But I've worked with killers long enough to know this was no amateur. Whoever did this know how to stage a ritual. They likely wore gloves or wrapped a handle. No fingerprints. But here," he held up the hilt wrapping. Beneath the layers of silk, a single thread of crimson fabric was stuck. Thin, high quality, the kind used only in ceremonial court robes. Hana's mind raced. Court robes, that meant someone from the upper hierarchy. Possibly even Hashikawa's own retinue. She carefully took the thread, wrapped it in paper, and stored it with a scroll. Piece by piece, her father's riddle was assembling into a grim mosaic. But it wasn't just a blade. She examined the seppuku setup again. The tatame had been carefully cleaned, but not perfectly. A faint trail of blood led away from the body, inconsistent with the traditional stillness of the rite. And the ink on the death poem, analyzed by the magistrate scribe, revealed something even more disturbing. 2 layers of handwriting. Saburo's brushstrokes were bold, always firm in direction. But here, underneath the ink, a faint guideline had been penciled. Whoever wrote it had practiced, imitated, but failed to hide the underdrawing fully. Forged. Her father's death poem, his jisei, had been manufactured. That broke the sacredness of it all. To forge a man's last words was a crime beyond murder. It wasn't just a death, it was a desecration, a deliberate theft of legacy. Someone wanted Saburo not just gone, but dishonored. But why? Returning to the scroll, Hana read the next decoded section. It referenced a pact beneath the camellia roots, a phrase she had once overheard Saburo whisper in frustration after a council meeting. The camellia tree in the courtyard had stood there for decades. Its roots ran deep, entwined around a hidden chamber used by the Takeda elders in times of secret war strategy. Hana had never entered it. That night, she did. Beneath the gnarled tree, she found the entrance, a stone panel, sealed with a rusted crest. She slid it open and descended into darkness with a lantern. The chamber below was cold, dry, and lined with scrolls and ledgers. Most were benign, maps, treaties, family histories. But hidden in a hollow compartment was something else, a blood-stained ledger wrapped in silk. Inside, she found names, transactions, dates, smuggled goods, opium, foreign weapons, coin shipments sent to the Ryukyu Islands, all signed in a cipher that matched the one in her father's scroll. The signature at the bottom? A crest belonging to Lord Hashikawa. It was treason, not just a trail of Saburo, but the entire code the clan was meant to uphold. Hashikawa had turned the clan into a conduit of illegal trade and corruption, and Saburo had found out. That's why he was killed, silenced, his blade used as a lie, his poem as a mask. But now Hana had the truth. The real blade, sharp, invisible, was what Saburo left behind in the scroll, and she was ready to wield it. The camellia roots had revealed treason. The blade had told its lie, and the forged death poem was now undeniable. Hana's heart burned with quiet fury as she pieced together the map her father left, but his riddle had more layers still. Among the coded lines in the puzzle scroll, one verse stood out, where wind and prayer entwine. Beneath leaves that never fall, the ink of silence waits. She recognized the phrase. It was one Saburo had spoken only once, when she asked why he visited the mountains alone each month. There's a place, he had said, where even silence speaks. That place was the Temple of Whispering Leaves. Perched high on a ridge east of the Takeda lands, the temple was ancient, predating the clan itself, dedicated not to one kami, but to the idea of balance between duty and self. It had served as a quiet sanctuary for those seeking reflection. Few visited anymore, and that, perhaps, was why Saburo had chosen it. The journey took Hana 2 days on foot, through dense cedar forests and winding stone paths choked with moss. With each step, memories of her father returned. Training in the rain, evenings of quiet tea, his voice repeating the same lesson. Honor is not obedience. It is conscience with a sword. At sunset, she reached the temple. It was modest in size, with wooden beams bleached gray from wind and time. Wind chimes hung under the eaves, and the soft rustling of trees gave the place its name, Whispering Leaves. A monk greeted her, elderly, with a face like weathered parchment and eyes that missed nothing. I seek answers, she said, bowing deeply. Then you've already begun, the monk replied. His name was Aiken, and he had known Saburo for decades, not as a fellow warrior, but as a confidant. He came here often, Aiken said as he poured tea, the aroma of roasted barley rising into the cold mountain air. In silence, mostly, but sometimes he left word behind, questions he feared to speak elsewhere. Did he know his life was in danger? Aiken's gaze turned inward. He knew the cost of seeing too much, and the burden of knowing when others choose blindness. They sat in the temple's main chamber, surrounded by faded scrolls and ancient relics. It was peaceful, almost painfully so. Here, far from the clan's politics and deceit, the truth seemed to breathe freely. He feared what would happen to the code. Aiken continued. The Bushido you both live by. It is more fragile than most realize. Men use it as armor, but it can also be used as a mask. Hana nodded. She had seen the mask firsthand. In Hashikawa's hollow condolences, in Matsuda's cold warning, in Ryoji's veiled bitterness. But Saburo had chosen to face that truth without compromise. And he had left more than riddles. He had left allies. Aiken led her to a chamber hidden behind a sliding panel. Inside was a scroll case wrapped in black silk. Saburo's seal marked the knot. It wasn't a riddle. It was a confession. Hana unrolled it slowly. Saburo's handwriting was unmistakable. Line after line detailed what it discovered. Illegal opium routes, secret meetings with foreign merchants, and erosion of loyalty within the clan. It named names, not all, but enough to trace the rot. It confirmed what the ledger beneath the camellia tree had hinted at. But more than that, the confession spoke his fear, not of death, but of being misunderstood. "I leave this not as a cry for vengeance," it read, "but as proof that I tried. I chose silence, hoping it would protect Hana. But if this reaches her, then silence has failed. She must choose now whether to walk the blade's edge as I did." Hana's hands trembled as she finished reading. She felt his presence, not as a ghost, but as a force. He had known they would kill him. He had known the blade would be turned against him. But he had trusted that she, raised in the same code, would carry on the fight in a different way. Aiken handed her a small wooden token. It bore the symbol of a crane flying backward, the emblem from the scroll's first riddle. "It opens a vault beneath the temple," he explained. "Only Saburo and I knew it existed. Now you do." Inside the vault was more than documents. There were weapons, forged in secret, blades bearing the marks of men who had defected from the code. There were journals, confessions from other samurai who had chosen exile over dishonor. And there were letters, intercepted correspondences between Hashikawa and foreign traders, sealed in wax, never meant to be seen by Japanese eyes. This was more than a mystery now. It was a war, waged in shadows, with ink, memory, and hidden truths. Saburo had built an archive of dissent, a vault of voices smothered by power. And now, they spoke to Hana through time. As she descended from the mountain temple, the wind stirred through the cedar trees like whispered warnings. The final war was not fought with swords. It was fought with stories, and hers was just beginning. The scroll from the Temple of Whispering Leaves had unearthed more than a confession. It had uncovered a legacy, Saburo's legacy, one of resistance, quiet rebellion, and a desperate hope that the old ways might yet survive with integrity. But buried within that legacy was a new puzzle, a phrase that kept echoing through Hana's thoughts: the code of the dying crane. The crane had appeared throughout the scrolls, flying backward, crying in the wind, fading beneath falling leaves. Saburo had used it as a motif, a metaphor, a warning. Now Hana began to see it for what it truly was, a hidden doctrine, passed secretly between loyal samurai like a whispered prayer, a dying philosophy, kept alive by those who saw honor not in blind loyalty, but in truth. She returned to the Takeda estate under the pretense of mourning, carrying her father's second scroll hidden beneath her robes. Already, the household's tone had shifted. Whispers followed her footsteps. Some bowed too low. Others avoided her altogether. She had become more than Saburo's daughter now. She was a question no one wanted asked. In her chambers, she began decoding the next portion of the puzzle scroll. This part, layered beneath the poem about the crane, contained a cipher based on seasonal kanji, a trick Saburo had once taught her to use when practicing memory retention. The message it revealed was chilling. Those who walk the path of the dying crane guard what the shogun never saw. Their blades are not drawn for war, but for truth, and truth is hunted. The message included a date, the 12th day of the harvest moon. That was the same date carved into the ledger beneath the camellia tree. A meeting had occurred that day, not just of traders, but of protectors. It wasn't just Saburo. There were others. She returned to the archives under the temple, reviewing the remaining documents with fresh eyes. One name kept resurfacing: Tachibana Ori, a former strategist from a neighboring clan who had been declared missing years ago. In a letter dated just weeks before Saburo's death, he had written, "The crane cannot sing where wolves gather, but we are not alone. The code lives, if only in fragments. The code is memory. You must become the ink." These men and women, strategists, warriors, monks, historians, had preserved a version of Bushido unsullied by ambition. They called themselves Karen no Kadai, the temporary ancient, guardians of the forgotten code, secret chroniclers of honor in a dishonorable age. And they had sworn an oath. If one of their number fell, another would carry the burden. Saburo, then, was not only a whistleblower. He was a member of this hidden order. And now, Hana was being asked to take his place. But what was the code, really? She found it hidden in a letter addressed not to her, but to someone named Kento of the South Sea Wind. The letter described the dying crane as more than a symbol. It was a vow. Its tenets, handwritten by Saburo, were unlike the rigid, idealized doctrines taught in dojo schools. They read, 1. When the sword is offered, ask who sharpened it. 2. When silence is demanded, speak inwardly, but never forget. 3. Loyalty is to truth, not title. 4. The dead leave maps in their margins. Read them. 5. If honor is gone and the ink dries red, bury the blade. And begin again. Each line was not just philosophical. It was a code of survival, a way to walk with integrity even when the world had turned corrupt. It confirmed what she had suspected all along. Saburo had seen the clan's decay as inevitable, but he had refused to become part of it. And so, he built a legacy for someone else, for Hana, to pick up, but she wasn't ready to call herself a warrior of the dying crane yet. She had one more task, to prove that what Saburo died for could bring down the men who killed him. Using the letters, the map from the scroll, and the forged documents from the secret archive, she compiled a dossier. In it were names, Matsuda, Ryoji, and finally, Lord Hashikawa, tied directly to the smuggling, the murders, the attempts to subvert the code. But one last riddle remained. A symbol found on multiple documents, a circle crossed by 3 parallel lines. It wasn't a crest she recognized. It wasn't part of the Takeda household. It was foreign. She visited a retired scholar who had once served in the court's intelligence division. When he saw the symbol, he frowned. "This is not Japanese," he said. "It is Portuguese." Portuguese? Her blood ran cold. The foreign merchants Saburo had warned about, they weren't just bringing in weapons and opium. They were bringing influence, alliances, control. The betrayal ran deeper than just a clan power grab. It was colonial. Saburo's death, she now understood, had not only been about silencing dissent, it had been about erasing the last defense against foreign manipulation. But the ink had not dried, the code had not died, and Hana was ready to wield it. By the time Hana began preparing for a confrontation, she had uncovered nearly every layer of the web that had killed her father, from the bloody katana to the encrypted scrolls, to the confession hidden in the temple vault. The path had been long and treacherous, but she now understood one thing with harrowing clarity. Saburo hadn't just died because of clan politics. He had been executed because he stood in the way of betrayal dressed in tradition, betrayal in silk robes. The phrase echoed in her mind. It came from Saburo's own scroll, the one who wears honor like silk hides poison in his sleeve. She knew now exactly who that line described. Lord Hashikawa. Elegant, refined, unshakably calm. The daimyo had always appeared to embody the highest ideals of Bushido. His speeches honored the ancestors. His robes were immaculate. His gardens were tended by monks. And yet, behind this perfect facade, he had orchestrated the unraveling of the very code he swore to protect. Saburo had suspected for years that Hashikawa was meeting in secret with foreign agents, exchanging opium for weapons, information for power. But what was once a trickle of evidence had now become a flood. The sealed correspondences Hana found in the temple's vault proved that the Lord had signed trade deals with European merchants, Portuguese smugglers, and Dutch profiteers, without approval from the shogunate. Even worse, the ledger beneath the camellia tree showed direct payment orders from Hashikawa's treasury, funding covert assassinations of those who might expose him. Saburo had known, and for that he was silenced. But what struck Hana most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the way it had been hidden beneath ritual. Hashikawa hadn't defied the code. He had weaponized it. By making Saburo's death look like an honorable seppuku, he ensured the clan would never ask questions. After all, a true samurai dies in silence, with dignity. No one would doubt it, especially when the killer wore the most immaculate robes of all. It was brilliant, terrifyingly so, and it was time for it to end. Hana crafted a plan, knowing she had only one opportunity to act. The next clan council was scheduled in 3 days, a formal event during which the leadership gathered to review seasonal budgets and ceremonial obligations. Hashikawa would preside, surrounded by his retainers. It would be the perfect place to speak the truth, and the most dangerous. On the second night, as she reviewed the forge Shisei again, Hana noticed something she had missed. A faint brush mark under the final line of the poem. It was not Saburo's hand. It was Hashikawa's. She remembered his writing. She had seen it on letters sent to her father when she was younger. His signature always ended in a peculiar curved flick. The same mark was present beneath Saburo's final poem. He hadn't just ordered the forgery. He had written it himself. It was his way of sealing the lie. And now she had the key. On the morning of the council, Hana arrived dressed not in mourning black, but in her father's muted gray hakama. Her sword, wrapped in white silk, hung at her side. The chamber was grand, paper lanterns swinging gently from carved beams, the lord seated in formal lines. She bowed deeply before entering. Hashikawa sat on the raised dais, flanked by Matsuda and Ryoji. His eyes narrowed as she approached. "Lady Hana," he said smoothly, "still bearing the weight of grief?" "I bear more than that," she replied. A murmur stirred in the room. "I come to submit an account," she continued, voice clear, "of treason, corruption, and murder." Hashikawa chuckled softly. Bold words. "I have evidence," she said. "Letters bearing your seal. A forged death poem in your hand. Records of bribes paid to foreign agents. My father did not commit seppuku. He was executed." Gasps rippled through the council. Some stood. Others froze. Hashikawa's mask began to crack. "You speak madness," he said, rising. "I speak truth," Hana answered. "The same truth my father died protecting." She pulled the scroll from her sleeve and laid it before the magistrate. His confession, his records, the blade that lied, and the hands that used it. Silence fell. The magistrate, uncertain but bound by duty, took the documents and motioned for the chamber to be cleared. What followed was hours of tension, review, whispers. By sunset, guards arrived, not for Hana, but for Hashikawa. He did not resist. Instead, he turned to Hana as he was led away and said quietly, "You were always his shadow. I should have cut you down sooner." She met his gaze, unflinching. Shadows grow long when the sun sets on men like you. And just like that, the man who once ruled in robes of silk was dragged from his seat by the very code he had tried to kill. But Hana knew it wasn't over. The traitors who followed him were still among the clan. The foreign interests still loomed. This victory was only the first. Her father's death had been a riddle, and now it had become a reckoning. For days after the council chamber's upheaval, silence returned to the Takeda estate, but not the peace that often followed it. It was a heavy silence, thick with consequences. Lord Hashikawa had been arrested. His retainers, Matsuda, Ryoji, and others, were under investigation. The leadership of the clan, once untouchable, now trembled on unstable ground. And at the center of it all stood Hana, not as a grieving daughter anymore, but as a living blade of her father's final truth. The evidence she had presented was undeniable. Documents bearing Hashikawa's personal crest, forged death poetry in his hand, smuggling records traced through clan accounts, and testimony, not just from Hana, but from allies her father had trusted in secret. All converged like a storm. For the first time in generations, a daimyo had been brought low not by force of arms, but by force of integrity. Still, the aftermath was brutal. Some elders resisted the verdict. They claimed it was disrespectful to question the will of the clan's leader, even in disgrace. Others, more fearful, scrambled to align themselves with Hana, sensing the winds of power shifting. And yet, Hana herself sought no title. She did not claim the leadership seat left empty by Hashikawa's removal. She refused the honor of being named a formal advisor. Instead, she returned to the dojo, the place where her father had first placed a wooden sword in her hands. That night, under moonlight filtered through plum blossoms, she unwrapped Saburo's katana and laid it before the shrine. The blade gleamed in silence, no longer a weapon of deceit, but a relic of perseverance. She knelt and whispered, "I understand now, everything." Her voice did not waver. She no longer feared the cost of truth. In the days that followed, Hana wrote a letter to the remaining elders. She called it the Daughter's Sword. In it, she made no threats, no demands, only a proposition. Let the blade speak truth again. Let the code be rewritten by those who remember what it was meant to protect. Not power, not wealth, but integrity. Let the next generation of samurai rise from shadows, not as servants of tradition, but as architects of justice. Let this clan no longer serve robes, but righteousness. Her word spread beyond this state. Scrolls were copied and shared among neighboring clans. Whispers of the daughter who unmasked the daimyo moved through markets and temples like wind through reeds. In Edo, court scribes took notice. In the south, exiled samurai began returning to their families. The story had become more than a reckoning. It was becoming legend. But Hana's war was not yet over. She had made enemies, not just those within her own house, but those beyond the borders of Japan. The Portuguese seal she had discovered, a simple emblem of 3 crossing lines within a circle, represented a trading company that had operated illegally in Japanese waters for years. Their deals with Hashikawa had opened a gate to foreign corruption, and they had already begun seeking a replacement. Rumors reached her of new emissaries arriving along the western coast, bearing gifts, promising alliances. The serpent had lost one head, but it was growing another. In response, Hana sent out discreet messages to surviving members of the Karen Kodai, to monks, wandering Ronin archivists, and all those who had once stood beside her father in secret. She did not ask them to fight with blades. She asked them to teach, to pass on the code of the dying crane to a new generation, in schools, in stories, in ink and discipline, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a living oath. When the sword is offered, ask who sharpened it. When silence is demanded, speak inwardly, but never forget. Loyalty is to truth, not title. That was the new creed. The blade was no longer just for cutting down enemies. It was for cutting through illusion. On the first day of spring, Hana stood before the newly reopened dojo. The students gathered in quiet rows, boys and girls, orphans and outcasts, none from noble houses, yet each with fire in their eyes. She lifted Saburo's katana, held it over her head, and spoke. This is the sword of a man who died for truth. If you wish to hold it, you must be willing to do the same. No one flinched. And in that moment, she saw what her father had dreamed of, not warriors bound by obedience, but protectors bound by choice. The daughter's sword had been drawn, not for vengeance, but for the future. Time passed. The flowers bloomed again on the grounds of the Takeda estate, and the long shadows cast by betrayal began to recede. The clan had survived the storm, bloodied, but wiser. Lord Hashikawa remained imprisoned, stripped of title and dignity. His conspirators were either exiled or disgraced. A new leadership council was formed, guided not by bloodline, but by merit and virtue. The name Saburo Takeda was no longer whispered in shame, but spoken with reverence. And yet, something remained unresolved. A riddle, not one written in ink or hidden beneath tatama mats, but one that pulsed within Hana's mind. Quietly, persistently, despite the truths she had uncovered, the justice she had demanded, and the legacy she revived, one question still haunted her. Why hadn't her father told her everything from the start? Why riddles? Why codes? Why not a single, honest conversation before his death? She stood again at the temple of whispering leaves, where wind danced through the trees and chimes clinked like distant thoughts. The monk Aiken greeted her with a silent bow. He left so much for me to unravel, Hana said, sitting beside the small altar. But not once did he look me in the eye and say, "This is what's happening." Not once did he warn me. Why? Aiken poured tea before answering. "Do you know what your father feared most?" he asked gently. "It was not death. It was not even dishonor. It was that he would turn you into him, a man bound by suspicion, always watching shadows. He wanted you to choose your path freely." Hana's hands tightened around her teacup. "But I walked it anyway." "Yes," Aiken nodded, "because you saw the truth, not because he forced it upon you." She looked down at the dirt path, winding through the temple garden. Her thoughts wandered back to her childhood, sparring in the courtyard, sitting silently beside Saburo during evening meditations. He had always been a man of few words, a man who taught by presence rather than command. Perhaps that had been the answer all along. He had left riddles not to obscure the truth, but to prepare her for it. Because in a world where blades were hidden behind smiles, only a daughter who could read the unspoken, who could follow the subtle signs, would survive the truth he had buried so carefully. Still, even with the conspiracy exposed, not all threads were severed. The symbol of the Portuguese company, the circle crossed by 3 lines, continued to appear in foreign merchant docks. And Hana learned through informants that new deals were being forged along the southern coast, this time with lesser lords hungry for foreign wealth. The serpent was not dead. It was migrating. One evening, she returned to the secret vault beneath the camellia tree and found a letter she had previously missed. Small, folded tightly, wedged into the seam of a box lid. It was addressed in Saburo's hand. To Hana should the riddles end. She opened it with trembling fingers. My daughter, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have become what I always hoped. Not my reflection, but my answer. I left you riddles not to challenge you, but to shield you. You were never meant to carry my war, but you did, and you did it with grace and fire. Still, there is one truth I cannot bury in ink. The battle is never over. Each generation must rewrite the code in its own hand. You will face enemies with softer smiles and deeper knives. They will not come with swords, but with gifts. Remember, not all peace is earned. Some is sold. You must carry the code now. You must become the new riddle, one they cannot solve. I am proud of you. Saburo. Tears blurred her vision as she folded the letter. He had known she would reach the end. And when she did, he left her not another question, but a truth more valuable than vengeance or even justice, that the fight for honor never truly ends, that it passes like a sword from one hand to the next. And so Hana stood once more in the dojo, the students before her eager, watchful. In her hand, Saburo's blade. On her lips, no war cry, just a question. What is the first duty of a warrior? A small boy in the front row raised his hand timidly. To protect? She smiled. No, she said. To ask why? The students nodded slowly. It would take time. But they were listening, learning. And somewhere in the wind beyond the estate, through whispering leaves and dancing plum blossoms, a voice seemed to echo, not with answers, but with riddles. Always riddles. Would you have solved a riddle in time? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold mysteries from the past. The truth is always hidden in the code.